"Mom, he plays better than you, you talentless old woman. This violin is for someone who truly deserves it." Those were the words of my son, Javier, as he handed my $50,000 Stradivarius to his father-in-law in front of his entire new family. In that moment, as I watched another man take the instrument that had been my life for 40 years, I knew my own son had just signed his own sentence. My name is Emily Carter. I am 70 years old, and my whole life I have been a violinist. Not a famous violinist, not someone who fills theaters, but a musician who has dedicated every day of her existence to perfecting her art and passing that passion on to her only son. Javier Carter, 42 years old, a successful engineer, father of my beloved granddaughter Abby, and until 3 months ago, the person I trusted most in this world. It all began on Saturday, October 22nd, 2022. I remember the date exactly because it was the 68th birthday of Anthony Miller, Javier's father-in-law. The celebration was held at the home of my daughter-in-law, Beatrice, a successful lawyer who had always treated me with respect, although lately I noticed a certain coldness in her behavior towards me. I arrived promptly at 2 in the afternoon, as I always did. I brought a modest but thoughtful gift, a biography of Leonard Bernstein that I had found in an old bookstore. Anthony was a retired music professor, and I thought he would like to learn more about the great American conductor. The house was full of guests. I recognized several of Anthony's colleagues from the conservatory where he had taught for 30 years, some neighbors, and family of Beatrice. The atmosphere was festive, with classical music playing softly in the background. My granddaughter Abby, who is 15, ran to hug me as soon as she saw me. "Grandma Emily, I'm so glad you came. Dad said you might play something for Grandpa Anthony," she told me with that smile that always lit up my day. I nodded, although I hadn't brought my violin. It wasn't the kind of event where I usually played, but if they asked, I could improvise something simple on the student violin Anthony kept at home. Javier approached a few minutes later, wearing a new suit, looking prosperous and confident. He worked for a well-respected engineering firm in Chicago and had achieved a standard of living that I could never give him when he was a boy. "Mom, I need to ask you a favor," he said, pulling me to a quiet corner of the living room. "Tell me, son, did you bring your violin?" "No, I didn't think it was necessary, but if you want me to play something, Anthony has one here." Javier frowned. "No, Mom, I need you to go home and get your Stradivarius. Anthony mentioned he'd never seen one up close, and it would be a perfect detail for his birthday." My heart sped up a little. My violin was not something I lent out easily. It was a Stradivarius from 1892, valued at $50,000, which I had bought in 1985 after saving for 10 years. Every dollar I earned giving private lessons, every performance at weddings and events, every sacrifice I made was to be able to buy that instrument. "Javier, I'm not very comfortable bringing the Stradivarius to a party. It's very valuable and—" "Mom, please, it's just for Anthony to see. Nothing will happen to it. You trust me, right?" The question sounded almost like a reproach. Of course I trusted him. He was my son, the boy I had taught to play his first scales when he was 6. The young man who had cried with emotion the first time he managed to play a complete sonata. "All right, I finally agreed. I'll go get it." It took me 40 minutes to go to my apartment, carefully take the violin case, and return to Beatrice's house. During the trip, I remembered all the times Javier had admired that instrument when he was little. "Someday it will be yours, son," I used to tell him, and he would smile with that mix of pride and responsibility that made me think I had raised my boy well. When I returned, the party was in full swing. Anthony had already opened several gifts and was chatting animatedly with his former colleagues from the conservatory. Javier met me at the door with a smile that, now that I think about it, had something strange about it. "Perfect, Mom. Come on, let's show it to Anthony." We headed towards where the guest of honor was. The group of retired musicians became visibly excited when they saw the case. "Is it true you brought your Stradivarius, Emily?" Anthony asked with shining eyes. "Yes. Javier insisted you'd like to see it." I opened the case with my usual care. The violin rested inside like a jewel, with that characteristic golden sheen of aged and perfectly cared for wood. The murmurs of admiration were immediate. "It's beautiful," Anthony whispered. "Can I play it?" I hesitated for a second, but we were among musicians, people who understood the value of such an instrument. Of course. Anthony took the violin with the reverence it deserved and played a few scales, then a simple melody. His technique was correct, though noticeably less refined than mine. The years of teaching had caused him to lose some of his interpretive skill. It was then that Javier said something that bewildered me. "Isn't it true that Anthony plays better than you, Mom?" The question caught me completely off guard. I looked at my son, searching for any sign that he was joking, but his expression was serious, almost challenging. "Well, Anthony is an excellent musician," I replied diplomatically, "but everyone has their own style." "No, Mom, let's be honest. Anthony has been a music professor his whole life. He has trained hundreds of students. You've only given private lessons." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The other guests began to move away discreetly, sensing the tension that had suddenly appeared in the room. "Javier," Beatrice intervened gently. "Maybe this isn't the time to." "No, Beatrice, it's exactly the time." Javier turned to Anthony, who was still holding my violin. "Anthony, this violin deserves to be in the hands of a real musician, someone who can give it the use it deserves." My heart began to beat faster. I didn't like where this conversation was going. "Javier, what exactly are you saying?" I asked, although a part of me already knew the answer. My son looked me directly in the eyes, and in that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. Contempt. "Mom, I want to give this violin to Anthony as a gift." The world stopped around me. "You can't give away something that doesn't belong to you," I managed to articulate, though my voice sounded strange, as if it were coming from far away. Javier laughed, a dry, dismissive laugh that I had never heard come from his lips. "Mom, let's be realistic. When was the last time you gave a real concert? When was the last time someone paid to hear you play something more complex than Happy Birthday?" Every word was like a slap in the face. The guests who still remained nearby began to murmur among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Anthony, still holding my violin, seemed as surprised as I was. "Javier, son, I don't understand why you're saying this. I bought that violin with my money, with years of work and sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" Javier raised his voice. "Mom, you lived your whole life in a 2-bedroom apartment, teaching spoiled kids for $20 an hour. You never amounted to anything. You were never anyone important in the world of music." I then remembered the day I bought that violin. It was March of 1985. Javier was barely 2 years old. His father, my dear husband Charles, had died 6 months earlier from cancer, and I was raising him alone while working, teaching music in 3 different schools and giving private lessons in the evenings. I had been saving for that Stradivarius since Charles and I got married. Every month I set aside a small amount, dreaming of the day I could play on an instrument of that quality. When I finally gathered the $50,000, I went to the most prestigious musical instrument shop in Chicago. The seller, an older man named Mr. Martinez, had told me, "This violin has a soul of its own. It has belonged to 3 generations of musicians. Take good care of it, and it will give you a lifetime of beautiful music." And so it had. For 37 years, that violin had been my faithful companion. With it, I had played at weddings, funerals, family celebrations. With it, I had taught Javier his first melodies. With it, I had mourned Charles's death and celebrated every small achievement of my son. "Anthony doesn't want your violin, Javier," I said, trying to stay calm. "Right, Anthony?" The poor man looked completely overwhelmed. "Emily, of course I can't accept something so valuable. It's your instrument, your work tool." "Work tool?" Javier scoffed. "Mom doesn't work anymore. She's retired. That violin is going to waste, stored in an apartment, gathering dust." "It doesn't gather dust," I replied firmly. "I play it every day. I practice for 2 hours every morning, as I have for the last 40 years. Practice for who, Mom? For the walls of your living room? For the neighbors who complain about the noise?" Beatrice approached and put a hand on her husband's arm. "Javier, please, this is getting out of hand. It's my father's birthday." But Javier was determined to continue. "No, Beatrice, someone had to say this sooner or later. Mom, you were never a real professional musician. You never played in a symphony orchestra, you never recorded an album, you never gave concerts in major theaters." His words hurt me because they had a hint of truth. Indeed, I had never achieved those accomplishments. After Charles's death, all my energy had focused on raising Javier and maintaining our home. The opportunities for a solo career had vanished between diapers, sleepless nights, and the constant need to generate a stable income. "You're right," I admitted. I wasn't a famous concert violinist, but I was your music teacher. I was the one who taught you to love this art. I was the one who got up at 5 in the morning to take you to your music classes before school, and I'm grateful for that, Mom. But that doesn't mean you should keep clinging to instruments that are above your actual level. Anthony finally spoke. Javier, I can't accept this gift. It's not right. Of course it's right, Javier insisted. Look, Mom, think about it practically. Anthony can use this violin for his master classes. He can lend it to advanced students who can really take advantage of it. Don't you think that's more noble than keeping it locked away? The perverse logic of his argument left me speechless for a moment. He was using my own love for music against me, suggesting that my selfishness was depriving the world of the beauty that instrument could create. Javier, I finally said, that violin isn't just an instrument to me. It's part of my history, of our history. Remember when I taught you to tune it when you were 8? Remember the first time you managed to play canon in D all the way through? For an instant, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. Exactly, Mom, those are beautiful memories, but they're in the past. Now that violin needs to create new memories, new stories, with someone who can really do it justice. Abby, my granddaughter, had approached during the argument. Her face showed confusion and sadness. Dad, why are you talking to Grandma like that? Javier turned to his daughter with a smile that tried to be fatherly but seemed condescending to me. Abby, sometimes adults have to make tough decisions. Your grandmother will understand. No, I don't understand, I said with more firmness than I had shown until then, and I do not agree. Javier's face hardened. Mom, don't be selfish. For years I've supported you financially. The apartment where you live is in my name, because your pension wasn't enough. I give you $2,000 every month so you can live with dignity. I think I have a right to have an opinion on how you use your possessions. This revelation hit me like a bucket of cold water. It was true that Javier had helped me financially, especially after my retirement. It was also true that the apartment was in his name for tax reasons he had handled, but I had never felt that gave him rights over my personal belongings. Javier, your financial support doesn't give you the right to dispose of my things. Oh, really? And who do you think is going to pay the medical bills when you have health problems? Who's going to take care of you when you can no longer live alone? Me, Mom. It's always been me who has been responsible for your well-being. The conversation had taken a cruel turn. My own son was using his generosity as a weapon against me, in front of strangers, in front of his own daughter. Anthony, I said, addressing Javier's father-in-law directly, please, give me back my violin. Anthony looked nervously between Javier and me. Emily, Mom, Javier interrupted with a firm voice. Anthony keeps the violin. It's my birthday present to him. It's not yours to give away. Are you sure? Javier smiled maliciously. Technically, everything in my apartment belongs to me, right? And you live in my apartment. In that moment, I understood that this was not a spontaneous argument. Javier had planned this humiliation. He had taken advantage of my trust. He had used my love for him to bring the violin, and now he was executing a deliberate plan to take it from me. Son, I said, and my voice trembled slightly. Do you really want to do this? It's already done, Mom. Anthony, happy birthday. And with those words, I saw how my $50,000 Stradivarius, my companion of 4 decades, my most cherished connection to the art that had defined my life, became the property of a stranger. But what hurt the most was not losing the violin. It was realizing that I had lost my son long before that day, and I just hadn't noticed. I left that house without saying goodbye to anyone. My legs were shaking as I walked to the subway station, but it wasn't from physical weakness. It was from a cold anger that was beginning to crystallize in my chest. During the ride back to my apartment, a single phrase repeated in my mind. Technically, everything in my apartment belongs to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my usual armchair, looking at the empty violin case. 40 years of keeping that instrument in the same place, and now only the red velvet mold where it had rested for so long remained. The absence was physical, as if an organ had been torn from me. But beyond the pain, something more powerful was beginning to sprout inside me. Javier had made a fundamental mistake. He had underestimated his old mother. He thought that because he helped me financially, because the apartment was in his name, he had total control over my life. He was wrong. At 8 o'clock on Monday morning, I called the law firm of Garcia and Associates. It was the firm that had handled the purchase of my original apartment before Javier insisted on changing the ownership for tax reasons 5 years ago. I got an appointment for that same afternoon with Mr. Garcia, a serious and meticulous lawyer who had inspired my trust from our first meeting, Mrs. Carter. He greeted me when I arrived at his office. "How can I help you?" "I need to review all the documents related to my financial situation, especially the apartment where I live and any other assets that might be registered in a complicated way." Mr. Garcia opened a thick folder with my papers. For the next hour, we went over every document, every transfer, every legal move that had been made in recent years. What I discovered surprised me and, at the same time, filled me with a grim satisfaction. "Mrs. Carter, indeed the apartment where you reside is in your son Javier's name, but there's something interesting here." The lawyer pointed to several papers. "Do you remember this apartment on North Michigan Avenue, number 143? Of course I remembered it. It was the apartment I had bought for Javier when he married Beatrice 8 years ago. A 1,200 square foot apartment in one of the most exclusive areas of Chicago, valued then at $180,000. Yes, I bought it for them as a wedding gift. Well, it turns out that, legally, this apartment is still registered in your name, Mrs. Carter. According to these documents, you made the purchase, but the property transfer to your son was never completed. I was paralyzed. How is that possible? Look, here is the original purchase agreement. You paid the full price, $180,000. But for the property transfer, additional signatures and the payment of certain taxes were required, which, for some reason, were never completed. The apartment where your son and his family live is, technically, yours." A slow smile spread across my face. Javier, in his arrogance, had overlooked this detail. While he was gloating about having me live in his apartment, he was actually living in mine. "And how much would this apartment be worth now?" I asked. Mr. Garcia consulted some data on his computer. Considering the location, the improvements made to the building, and the current real estate market, I would say between $200,000 and $220,000. It had gained value. My wedding gift to Javier was now worth $40,000 more than what I had paid for it. "Mrs. Carter, may I ask what you plan to do with this information?" "I'm not sure yet." I lied. In reality, I already knew exactly what I was going to do, but I needed time to plan every detail. That night, for the first time in days, I slept soundly. The next day, Tuesday, I began my silent investigation. Javier had always been vain about his social media. His Instagram account was full of photos of his successful life. Dinners at expensive restaurants, vacations abroad, photos of his office with his engineering degree framed on the wall. But what interested me were his most recent stories. And there it was. A photo of my Stradivarius at Anthony's house, with the caption, "Finally, this beautiful instrument is in the right hands. My father-in-law deserves it more than anyone. Real music, true talent." The post had dozens of likes and comments from his friends and colleagues. "How generous you are, Javier. Your father-in-law must be thrilled. Beautiful gesture." Each comment was like a stab, but also like fuel for my determination. I continued to check his social media from the past few months. Javier obsessively documented his life, and that was giving me valuable information. He had posted photos of the renovations he had done in his apartment. A new kitchen for $15,000, a state-of-the-art sound system, designer furniture. But what really caught my attention was a post from 3 weeks ago. Javier had uploaded a photo from his office with the caption, "Working hard on the new project. If everything goes well, this contract will change our lives. Engineering of the future. Secret project." In the comments, some colleagues asked for details, and although Javier didn't reveal much, he did mention that it was the biggest contract of his career and that they could finally live without financial worries. This made me think, if Javier was about to get his big professional break, why had he chosen this particular moment to humiliate me? Had the imminent success made him feel that he no longer needed me? That he no longer had to keep up the appearance of a grateful son? On Wednesday morning, I returned to Mr. Garcia's office. "Mrs. Carter, you're back so soon. Have you made a decision?" "Yes, I want to sell the apartment on North Michigan Avenue." The lawyer frowned. "That's going to create a very complicated situation with your son. He and his family live there. I know that perfectly well. May I ask why you want to do this?" I told him the whole story of the violin, of the public humiliation, of Javier's cruel words. Mr. Garcia listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Carter, but selling the apartment where your son lives is a very drastic measure. Wouldn't you prefer to talk to him first? There's nothing left to talk about. My son decided he could dispose of my belongings because he manages my financial situation. Now he's going to learn that financial relationships work in both directions. All right, but I need to warn you that this process can take time. We will have to notify the current occupants, give them a legal deadline to vacate. How much time exactly? Under normal conditions, between 3 and 6 months. And if we sell it very quickly, below market price? Mr. Garcia looked at me with curiosity. If we were willing to accept, say, $160,000, we could close in less than a month. I have contacts with investors looking for properties in that area. $160,000. $20,000 less than what I had originally paid, but $40,000 more than what my stolen violin was worth. It was a transaction I could live with. Do it. That afternoon, as I walked back home, I thought about what Javier had said. For years, I've supported you financially. It was partially true. His monthly help of $2,000 had made my retirement more comfortable. But it was also true that, without him knowing, I had been the one who financed his home, his stability, his ability to show off to his in-laws by living in an exclusive area of Chicago. The irony was perfect. Javier had used his financial control over me as justification to steal my violin. Now he was going to discover that his housing security depended on the generosity of the mediocre old musician he had so despised. For the first time in days, I played my student violin. It wasn't a Stradivarius, but it was still music, and as I played one of my late husband Charles's favorite pieces, I knew he would have approved of what I was doing. Sometimes, justice comes disguised as consequences. On Thursday morning, Mr. Garcia called me with news that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Mrs. Carter, I have a firm offer for the apartment. $165,000. Cash payment. Closing in 15 days. Only 15 days. The buyer is a German businessman looking for investment properties in Chicago. He doesn't need a mortgage, and his lawyers have already reviewed all the documentation. If you accept, we can sign the preliminary contract tomorrow. I accepted immediately. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but smile, thinking of the look on Javier's face when he found out. But that would have to wait a little longer. First, I had to complete my investigation. That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years, visit Anthony Miller's social media. He wasn't hard to find. Javier had tagged him in several posts. His Facebook profile was exactly what I expected from a retired professor. Photos of grandchildren, articles about classical music, memories of his years teaching at the conservatory. But what caught my attention was a post from that very morning. Anthony had uploaded a photo of my Stradivarius with a text that made my blood boil. Thanks to the generosity of my son-in-law Javier, I now have access to this magnificent instrument. Tomorrow, Friday, I will begin using it in my master classes for advanced students. It's exciting to think of all the young talent that will be able to benefit from the quality of this historic violin. The post had comments from several of his former students congratulating him on the acquisition. Some even asked if they could reserve time to try it themselves. My violin had become a sort of tourist attraction in the Chicago music scene, but what bothered me the most was seeing that Javier had commented on the post. "I'm glad to know it's finally in the right hands, Anthony. My mother never gave it the use it deserved. Now it can create real music." That phrase, real music, stuck in my mind. For 40 years I had created music with that instrument. Music for weddings where the bride and groom cried with emotion. Music for funerals where families found comfort. Music for family celebrations where children danced and grandparents remembered their youth. Was that not real music? I decided to dig deeper into my investigation. I went to Beatrice's Instagram profile and discovered something interesting. 2 weeks ago, she had posted a photo from a very exclusive restaurant with the caption, "Celebrating in advance. Big changes are coming for our family." In the comments, her friends asked for details, and although Beatrice didn't reveal much, she had replied to one of them. "Javier is about to sign the most important contract of his career. We can finally live without limits." This confirmed what I had seen on Javier's profile. They were both counting on imminent professional success, which explained why my son had felt so confident in publicly humiliating me. In his mind, he no longer needed me financially, so he could afford the luxury of treating me like a nuisance. On Friday morning, I went to sign the preliminary sales contract. Mr. Garcia had prepared all the necessary documents for me. Mrs. Carter, once we sign this, the process will be irreversible. Are you absolutely sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I signed each page with a calmness that surprised even me. As I did, I thought of all the times Javier had bragged about his apartment, on all the occasions he had used that property to impress clients, friends, and Beatrice's family. It had never occurred to him to verify if it was really his. When will the current occupants be notified? I asked. Legally, we have to give a formal 30-day notice, but considering it's your son, maybe you'd prefer to talk to him first. No. I want the normal legal process to be followed. Send the official notification. That afternoon, while waiting at home, I decided to check Javier's social media one more time, and I came across something that filled me with a vengeful satisfaction. He had posted a new photo from Anthony's studio, showing my violin in its case. The text said, "Visiting my father-in-law in his studio. It's incredible to see how a quality instrument can completely transform a musician's sound." I definitely made the right decision rescuing this Stradivarius from inexperienced hands. Rescuing. That word hit me like a punch. In my son's mind, he hadn't stolen my violin. He had rescued it from me. He had rewritten history to become the hero who saves a valuable instrument from the clutches of a mediocre musician. The comments on the post were even worse. Several of his friends congratulated him on his generosity and his practical vision. One even wrote, "What a smart way to handle the situation." Older parents sometimes cling to things they can no longer use properly. I realized that Javier hadn't just stolen my violin. He had built an entire public narrative in which he was the responsible son who makes difficult but necessary decisions for the good of everyone. I was the stubborn old woman who didn't know what was good for her, but there was a detail in that post that caught my attention. In the background of the photo, a calendar was visible on the wall of Anthony's studio. It had a date marked with a red circle. Friday, November 11th. Charity recital, Street Lawrence Auditorium. It was in 2 weeks. Anthony was going to use my violin in a public concert. The idea was so offensive that I had to get up and walk around the apartment to calm down. But after a few minutes, an idea began to form in my mind. A public recital meant there would be an official announcement, probably in the local paper or on the auditorium's social media. It meant that Anthony would be promoting the event, possibly mentioning the magnificent Stradivarius he would be using. I searched on Google for Street Lawrence Auditorium Chicago and found their website. Indeed, they already had the event posted. Charity recital for the Music for All Foundation. Anthony Miller will perform works by Bach, Mozart, and Vivaldi. The concert will feature a Stradivarius violin from 1892, courtesy of a private donation. A private donation. They didn't even have the decency to admit it was a stolen gift. But this gave me a perfect opportunity. A public event, with a printed program, with an audience, with possibly a cultural journalist present. The ideal stage for a confrontation that Javier could not control or manipulate. That night, I called Mr. Garcia. "Mrs. Carter, what can I do for you? I need you to investigate something. Is it possible to legally prove that a specific object belongs to me? I have receipts, purchase documents, even photographs that prove it's mine. Of course, if you have documentation that proves ownership, I can prepare the necessary papers to claim it." Perfect. And there's something else. Can you accompany me to an event on the evening of Friday, November 11th? An event? A recital where they are going to use my stolen property? I think it's the perfect time to get back what is mine. Mr. Garcia was silent for a few seconds. "Mrs. Carter, are you planning to interrupt a public concert?" "I'm planning to reclaim my stolen property at the time and place where the theft will be most evident. That could create a very tense situation." That's exactly the idea. For the first time in weeks, I went to sleep with a smile on my face. Javier had thought he could humiliate me publicly without consequences. Now he was going to find out what public humiliation really meant. And best of all, he himself had provided all the information I needed to plan my counterattack. Over the next week, I became a meticulous investigator. I hired the services of a private detective named Ray Sanchez, a 50-year-old man, a former cop who specialized in cases of recovering stolen property. "Mrs. Carter," he told me during our first meeting in a discreet cafe near my home, "I need you to explain exactly what kind of documentation you have on the violin." I showed him everything. The original purchase receipt from 1985, the insurance policies I had maintained all these years, photographs of me playing the instrument at different family events, and even a certificate of authenticity issued by an expert in historical instruments. "This is solid," Ray confirmed after reviewing each document. "But we need something more. We need evidence that your son took the violin without your consent and gave it to someone else. My testimony isn't enough. In a court of law, yes, but you're telling me you want to recover it in public, in front of witnesses. For that, we need irrefutable proof that no one can question at the moment." Ray was right. If I was going to confront Anthony during the recital, I needed evidence so clear that there would be no room for discussion or misunderstanding. "What do you suggest?" "We need to document that the violin is indeed in the possession of Anthony Miller, and we need to establish the chain of how it got there." "Did your son post anything else on social media about this?" I showed him all the posts I had found. Ray studied them carefully, taking screenshots of each one. "Perfect. This proves that your son publicly admits to taking the violin and giving it to his father-in-law. Now we need something more direct." "Like what?" "Like recordings. Do you have any recording of the conversation where your son told you he was keeping the violin?" I didn't, but Ray explained that we could get something even better. "If we can get your son or his father-in-law to admit on a recording that they have the violin and that you did not agree to the transfer, we will have definitive evidence." The idea made me nervous, but Ray assured me that it was completely legal to record conversations when one was a party to them. The following Tuesday, armed with courage and a small recording device Ray had provided, I called Anthony. "Emily," he answered with a surprised voice. "I wasn't expecting your call." "Anthony, I wanted to talk to you about the violin." There was an awkward pause. "Listen, Emily, I didn't want things to happen the way they did. Your son was very insistent and—" "So you admit that the violin belonged to me?" "Of course it was yours. I never doubted that. But Javier assured me that you agreed with the donation. Did Javier specifically tell you that I had consented?" "Yes. He told me that you had talked and that you had decided it was better for the violin to be with someone who could use it professionally. Exactly what I needed." Anthony was confirming that he knew the violin was mine and that Javier had lied to him about my consent. "Anthony, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I never agreed to that donation. Javier took the violin without my permission." The silence on the other end of the phone was long and uncomfortable. "Emily, if that's true, then I have a stolen violin." "Exactly, but I've already announced the recital." "I've already sold tickets. The foundation is counting on the funds we're going to raise." "That doesn't change the fact that the violin is mine and was taken without my consent." "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to return my violin, but Javier is going to kill me. He assured me everything was fine." "The problems between Javier and me are not your responsibility, Anthony. You are a victim of his lies as much as I am." Anthony sighed deeply. "All right, I can return the violin, but I need time to explain to the foundation, to cancel the recital." "No," I said firmly. "Don't cancel anything." "Excuse me? Keep the recital as planned. I will take care of recovering my violin that night." "You're coming to the concert?" "Yes, and I'm going to reclaim my property in front of all the attendees." Another long silence. "Emily, that's going to be very embarrassing for everyone. You should have thought of that before accepting a stolen violin." I hung up before he could respond. The recording had captured everything I needed. Anthony admitting he knew the violin was mine, that Javier had lied to him about my consent, and that he was aware he was in possession of someone else's property. That night, Ray came to my apartment to review the recording. "Excellent work, Mrs. Carter. This is exactly what we needed." "Do you think it will be enough?" "More than enough. Now we need to plan exactly how you will proceed during the recital." We spent the next 2 hours designing every detail of my plan. Ray explained my legal rights, what I could and couldn't say, how to behave to avoid being accused of disturbing the peace. "The most important thing," he warned me, "is to remain calm at all times. You are within your rights, but if you get upset or shout, they can throw you out, and then you'll lose your opportunity." We also agreed that he would be present at the recital, recording the entire interaction from the audience in case we needed additional evidence later. On Thursday, 2 days before the recital, I received an unexpected call from Javier. "Mom, what's this Anthony is telling me about you wanting the violin back? Are you surprised?" "Mom, we already talked about this. The violin is better off with him. We never agreed on anything, Javier. You took my violin without my permission and gave it to someone else. That's called theft. Don't be dramatic. It's a gift between family. Anthony is not my family, and it was not a gift from me." "Mom, please, don't make a scene. Anthony has already invested money in promoting the recital. He's already sold tickets. You should have thought about that before. Are you going to ruin a charity event because of your selfishness?" The word selfishness made me laugh. My selfishness, Javier. Who was the one who unilaterally decided to dispose of someone else's property? All right. What do you want? Do you want me to buy you another violin? I can get you one just as good. I don't want another violin. I want my violin. Mom, be reasonable. After the recital, I'll talk to Anthony, and we'll see how to sort it out. There's nothing to sort out after the recital. I'm going to get my violin back during the recital. What does that mean? It means I'm going to be there and I'm going to publicly claim my property. Mom, don't you dare ruin that event. It would be humiliating for the whole family. Humiliating? The irony was delicious to me. How was it humiliating for me when you took my violin in front of strangers? That was different. No, Javier. That was exactly the same. The only difference is that now you're the one who's going to be humiliated. I hung up the phone feeling more certain than ever of my decision. Javier had had multiple opportunities to do the right thing and had chosen arrogance every time. On Friday night, he was going to learn that actions have consequences and that underestimating his old mother had been the costliest mistake of his life. Friday, November 11th arrived with a light rain that seemed to foreshadow the storm I was about to unleash. I dressed in my best suit, the same one I had worn to Charles's funeral 15 years ago. I combed my hair carefully and looked in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer the confused victim of 3 weeks ago. She was someone determined to reclaim her dignity. Mr. Garcia arrived promptly at 7 p.m. He brought a briefcase with all the legal documents we had prepared, the violin's ownership papers, the screenshots of Javier's social media posts, the recording of my conversation with Anthony, and something special he had prepared for me as a surprise. "Mrs. Carter, here is the official notification of the sale of your son's apartment. It arrived this morning by certified mail. It was a white envelope with the law firm's letterhead. Inside, on official paper, was the communication informing Javier that he had 30 days to vacate the apartment because it had been sold by the rightful owner. When exactly did he receive it? The Postal Service confirms it was delivered at 11 inches the morning. Your daughter-in-law Beatrice signed for it. Perfect. That meant Javier had had all day to process the news, to call me, to try to negotiate, but he hadn't. His silence told me he was probably looking for some way to legally reverse the situation. Or maybe he simply couldn't believe that his old mother had been capable of such a decisive move. We arrived at the Street Lawrence Auditorium at 7:45. It was an intimate theater, with a capacity for about 200 people. The entrance was decorated with posters for the event: charity recital, Anthony Miller, masterpieces of the Baroque and Classical. In smaller print it mentioned, with the special participation of a Stradivarius violin from 1892. My violin, promoted as if it were part of the show, as if it were an exhibit, instead of the companion of a lifetime it had been for me. "Are you ready, Mrs. Carter?" Mr. Garcia asked me as we bought the tickets. "More than ready." Ray was already inside, strategically located in a middle row, where he could record everything without drawing attention. He gave me a discreet nod when he saw us enter. The auditorium was filling up quickly. I recognized several local musicians, some critics from the cultural newspapers, and many faces that were probably family and friends of Anthony. In the front rows, I saw Javier, Beatrice, and Abby. My granddaughter looked beautiful in a navy blue dress, but even from a distance, I could see the tension on her parents' faces. Javier saw me enter, and his face transformed completely. He stood up as if to approach, but Beatrice stopped him by putting a hand on his arm. They exchanged a few whispered words, and he sat down again, but he didn't stop looking at me the whole time. "Mr. Garcia and I were looking for our seats. We chose a location near the aisle, in the middle of the auditorium, from where we could move easily when the time came. At 8 o'clock sharp, Anthony came on stage. He looked elegant in his tuxedo, though I noticed he seemed more nervous than usual. He was carrying my Stradivarius in his hands. Seeing my violin under the stage lights was like being stabbed. There it was, the instrument that had been my soul for 4 decades, being presented as if it belonged to another man. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Anthony began with a clear voice. "It is an honor to be here tonight, for this charity recital, for the benefit of the Music for All Foundation. Tonight, I have the special privilege of performing these masterpieces with a Stradivarius violin from 1892, an instrument of incalculable value that has been generously loaned for this occasion." Every word was like poison in my ears, generously loaned, as if I had had any voluntary participation in that loan. Anthony began with Bach's air on the G string. I must admit his performance was competent, though technically inferior to what I could do with the same instrument. But hearing my violin being played by other hands, seeing the audience applaud a music that came from my stolen companion, was an exquisite torture. During the first 20 minutes of the concert, I watched the audience carefully. I saw how Javier looked alternately between the stage and where I was sitting. I saw how Beatrice constantly whispered in his ear. I saw how Abby applauded innocently, not knowing she was witnessing the use of stolen property. After the third piece, Anthony paused to speak to the audience. "Before I continue, I would like to say a few words about this magnificent instrument I am having the honor of playing tonight." He raised my violin to the lights. "This Stradivarius from 1892 represents not only the craftsmanship of one of the great luthiers in history, but also the generosity of people who understand that music must be shared. It was my moment." I stood up from my seat. "Pardon the interruption," I said in a clear, firm voice, loud enough for the entire auditorium to hear me. A murmur of surprise spread through the theater. Anthony looked at me from the stage with wide eyes. Javier stood up immediately. "That violin you are holding belongs to me. It was taken from my house without my consent 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Anthony stammered from the stage. Ma'am, please, this is not the time." "This is exactly the time," I replied, walking down the aisle towards the stage. Mr. Garcia followed me with the briefcase of documents. Javier shouted from his seat, "Mom, don't do this." I turned to him. "Don't do what, Javier?" "Reclaim my own property, the same property that you took without my permission and gave away without my consent." The audience began to murmur louder. Some stood up to get a better view of the scene that was unfolding. I got on stage. Anthony instinctively backed away, still holding my violin. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the audience calmly, "my name is Emily Carter. I am a violinist, and that instrument you just saw played is mine. I bought it in 1985 with my own savings. I have all the documents to prove it." Mr. Garcia came on stage with me and opened the briefcase. "Here is the original purchase receipt, the insurance policies maintained for 40 years, photographs of Mrs. Carter playing this very instrument on multiple occasions, and a certificate of authenticity." Anthony looked at me with a mixture of terror and understanding. "Emily, I didn't know," Javier told me. "Javier lied to you," I said simply. "He told you I had consented to donate it, but, as you can see from this recording, Mr. Garcia activated a small player. You yourself admit that you knew the violin belonged to me." Anthony's voice came clearly from the player. "Of course it was yours. I never doubted that, but Javier assured me that you agreed with the donation." A murmur of shock ran through the auditorium. Javier had turned completely pale. Anthony looked at me. He looked at Javier. He looked at the expectant audience. And finally, with trembling hands, he handed me my Stradivarius. The familiar weight of the instrument in my hands was like reuniting with an old friend after a long, forced exile. "Thank you," I said to Anthony. Then I turned to the audience. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have a second announcement to make." I took the white envelope from my inner pocket. "Javier Carter, my son, has today received official notification that the apartment where he lives with his family has been sold. He has 30 days to vacate." The silence of the auditorium was broken by an explosion of murmurs and exclamations. Javier stood up, completely livid. "That's impossible," he shouted from his seat. "That apartment is mine." "No, Javier," I replied with supernatural calm. "That apartment is registered in my name. It has always been in my name, and it has already been sold. I saw how Beatrice slumped in her seat, putting her hands to her face. I saw how Abby looked at her parents, not understanding what was happening. "Mom!" Javier shouted. "You can't do this!" "I can't?" I smiled at him. "Remember what you told me 3 weeks ago? Technically, everything in my apartment belongs to me. Well, it turns out that technically, your apartment belongs to me. Justice," I thought as I hugged my recovered violin, sometimes comes disguised as inevitable consequences. The chaos that followed was indescribable. Javier pushed his way through the rows of seats, shoving other attendees in his desperation to reach the stage. His face had gone from pale white to a furious red I had never seen before. "Give me back that violin right now," he roared as he took the stage steps 2 at a time. But Mr. Garcia stood between us. "Mr. Carter, I advise you to calm down. Your mother is exercising her legal rights over her own property." "My mother is senile," Javier shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "She can't make coherent decisions." The accusation of senility in front of 200 people was the last straw. I stood up to my full height and spoke with a voice that echoed throughout the auditorium. "Senile, Javier? Was I senile when I discovered that the apartment where you live was still in my name? Was I senile when I hired a lawyer and a private detective to document your theft? Was I senile when I organized this public recovery of my property?" The audience watched as if they were witnessing a particularly intense play. Some had started recording with their cell phones. Beatrice finally reached the stage, with Abby by the hand. My daughter-in-law's eyes were red and she looked on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Emily, please," she begged me. "We can solve this in private, not in front of all these strangers." "In private?" I repeated. "Like when your husband decided to humiliate me privately in front of your family, or when he posted on social media that he had rescued my violin from my inexperienced hands." Abby looked at me with teary eyes. "Grandma, I don't understand what's happening." I knelt down to her level. She was the only innocent person in this whole situation. "Abby, honey, 3 weeks ago your dad took something very important to me without asking for permission. Something I bought with my own money many years ago, before you were born. The violin?" "Yes, the violin. And when I asked him to give it back, he told me I wasn't good enough to play it." Abby looked at her father with an expression of confusion and disappointment. "Dad, is that true?" Javier stammered, trying to find words to justify his actions in front of his daughter. "Abby, you don't understand. Adult situations are complicated." "They're not complicated," I interrupted him. "Taking something that doesn't belong to you without permission is called stealing. That's something any 15-year-old girl can understand perfectly." Anthony, who had remained silent during the entire exchange, finally found his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the audience, "I deeply regret this situation. Obviously, the recital cannot continue under these circumstances. We ask you to keep your tickets, and we will notify you of a new date once we have resolved these misunderstandings." "There are no misunderstandings," I said firmly. "There is a theft that has just been publicly exposed." Javier made one last desperate attempt. "Mom, think about what you're doing. You're destroying your own family." "My family?" I turned to him with a sad smile. "Javier, you destroyed this family the day you decided you could dispose of my belongings as if you were my owner. You destroyed this family when you called me a mediocre musician in front of strangers. You destroyed this family when you used your financial support as a weapon to control me." Mr. Garcia took another document from his briefcase. "Mr. Javier Carter, I must also officially notify you that your mother has canceled all monthly transfers to you. The financial support of $2,000 per month is suspended as of today." If Javier had been pale before, he now looked truly sick. "Mom, you can't do that. We have expenses, the car payment, Abby's classes." "You should have thought of that before you bit the hand that fed you." Beatrice began to cry openly. "Emily, we didn't know you would react like this." "Javier thought you agreed." "Agreed?" My voice rose. "Did I seem like I agreed when I left your house without saying goodbye? Did I seem like I agreed when I haven't spoken to Javier in 3 weeks?" An older man from the audience stood up and shouted, "Well done, ma'am. No one has the right to treat their mother like that." Other attendees began to applaud. Apparently, my cause had gained sympathy among the spectators. Javier looked around, realizing that public opinion was completely against him. His arrogance finally broke, and for the first time in years, I saw tears in his eyes. Mom, please, we can fix this. I'll give you the violin back. We'll talk to the bank to reverse the sale of the apartment. Reverse the sale? Mr. Garcia intervened. Mr. Carter, the sale is already closed. The money has already been transferred. The process is irreversible. What money? Javier asked with a broken voice. $165,000, I replied. The apartment I bought you as a wedding gift and never legally transferred to your name. Beatrice collapsed into a chair on the stage. $165,000. Emily, what are you going to do with that money? I've already decided, I announced. I'm going to use that money for something that really matters. Something that honors the memory of my husband and my love for music. Javier looked at me with total desperation. What are you going to do? I'm going to buy a retirement home for elderly musicians who have no family to take proper care of them. Musicians who have dedicated their lives to art but ended up alone and abandoned. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It wasn't the silence of shock or confusion. It was the silence of recognition, of respect. A woman in the audience shouted, "That's beautiful! What a noble project!" Others began to applaud again, this time with more enthusiasm. Javier fell to his knees on the stage. Mom, please, forgive me. It was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. I looked down at him. This 42-year-old man who had been my pride and joy, now kneeling and begging like a child. Javier, you knew exactly what you were doing. You humiliated me deliberately. You used my trust against me. And most unforgivably of all, you did all this in front of your own daughter. Abby came over to me and hugged my waist. Grandma, I didn't know Dad had done that. If I had known, I would have told him it was wrong. I stroked my granddaughter's hair. I know, honey, none of this is your fault. I looked one last time at Javier, still kneeling on the auditorium stage, surrounded by 200 people who had witnessed his downfall. Son, I said to him with a voice that sounded strangely calm, for 70 years I have lived without publicly humiliating anyone. But you taught me that sometimes you have to do exactly that for people to understand the consequences of their actions. I headed for the stage exit with my recovered violin in one hand and Abby's hand in the other. The difference between you and me, I added without turning around, is that I waited until I was right to do it. The entire auditorium stood up and gave me a standing ovation as I left the stage. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt completely at peace. The days following the recital were a revelation. The story had spread like wildfire through Chicago. Several journalists contacted me for interviews. Social media was full of comments supporting my decision. And my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from elderly musicians who had heard about my retirement home project. But the most satisfying thing was the absolute silence from Javier. For a whole week, I didn't receive a single call, message, or attempt at contact from him. It was as if he had disappeared from the world, probably too ashamed to show his face after the public spectacle he had starred in. It was Abby who finally broke that silence. She arrived at my apartment on Tuesday afternoon, straight from school, with her eyes swollen from crying. "Grandma, I need to talk to you," she said as soon as I opened the door. I let her in and made her a hot chocolate, just as I used to do when she was younger and came to visit. "How are your parents?" I asked, although part of me already knew the answer. "Bad, Grandma, really bad." Abby took a sip of the chocolate and looked at me with those sincere eyes that reminded me so much of her grandfather, Charles. "Dad hasn't left his room since Friday. Mom is trying to borrow money from her parents to rent a new apartment." "And how are you?" Confused, she sighed deeply. "Part of me understands why you did what you did. Dad was very mean to you, but another part of me is scared because I don't know where we're going to live." Her honesty moved me. At 15, Abby had more emotional maturity than her father at 42. "Abby, I want you to know something very important. None of what is happening is your fault, and no matter what happens between your father and me, you will always have a place in my life. But are you going ahead with the retirement home?" "Yes. It's something I feel I have to do." Abby nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something else? Can Dad change?" The question hit me in the heart. I looked at my granddaughter, this young woman who still had hope in the world, who still believed that people could redeem themselves. "I don't know, Abby. I hope so. But the change has to come from him, not from me." That same afternoon, after Abby left, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Garcia. "Mrs. Carter, I have some interesting news about the retirement home project." "What kind of news?" I've been looking into available properties and I found something perfect. There's a 19th century mansion on the outskirts of Chicago, specifically in Evanston. It belonged to a merchant family and has been empty for 5 years. The price is $140,000. And why is it perfect for my project? It has 20 rooms, extensive gardens, an original music room with excellent acoustics, and it's located in a quiet area but with easy access to medical services. Also, the municipal government has shown interest in supporting social projects like this. That night I couldn't sleep from excitement. The idea of turning a historic mansion into a refuge for elderly musicians filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in years. The next day, Mr. Garcia and I visited the property. It was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The gardens were neglected, but they had incredible potential. The music room had a grand piano covered with a sheet, and when Mr. Garcia removed it, we revealed a Steinway in perfect condition. The previous owner was a music lover, the real estate agent who accompanied us explained. The whole house is designed with music in mind. I signed the purchase offer that same day. As we drove back to Chicago, Mr. Garcia asked me, "Have you thought about a name for the retirement home?" I had thought about it from the moment I conceived the idea. The Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home, in memory of my husband. That's a beautiful name. That night, I called several contacts in the Chicago music world. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Maria Fernandez, a retired cellist I had known for 30 years, cried when I explained the project. "Emily, this is exactly what we need. There are so many older musicians living alone, forgotten by their families, surviving on minimal pensions. Would you be interested in being one of the first residents?" "Of course. And I know 5 other musicians who would be interested immediately." Over the next few days, my phone became a coordination center for the project. Retired violinists, elderly pianists, retired opera singers, they all wanted to be part of this musical community. But the call that impacted me the most came on Thursday night. It was from a journalist from the Chicago Tribune. "Mrs. Carter, my name is Ricardo Vega. I'm writing an article about your musical retirement home project. Could we do an interview?" "Of course. I would also like to ask you about the situation with your son. Is it true that the confrontation at the auditorium was planned as a way to reclaim your dignity?" The question made me reflect. It wasn't planned as revenge, if that's what you're asking. It was planned as justice. There's an important difference. What is that difference? Revenge seeks to cause harm for the pleasure of it. Justice seeks to correct an imbalance and teach a lesson. Everything I did was intended to show that actions have consequences. And has your son learned that lesson? That's for him to decide. The article was published on Sunday in the Culture section with the headline, "The Violinist Who Turned Humiliation into Hope." It included photos of the mansion I had bought and details about how the Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home would be the first project of its kind in the state. The public response was incredible. I received calls from potential donors, volunteers who wanted to help with the renovation, and musicians from all over the country interested in the project. But the call that surprised me the most came on Monday morning. It was from Beatrice. "Emily." Her voice sounded tired and defeated. "I need to talk to you. I'm listening. Javier wants to see you. He's been very unwell since Friday. He's not eating, barely sleeping, not going to work. And what does he want from me?" "Forgiveness. He wants to ask for your forgiveness properly." "Beatrice, forgiveness isn't asked for, it's earned." "I know. But could you at least hear him out? For Abby's sake, if not for his." I looked out the window at the gardens of the building where I lived, thinking about the new life I was building, about the elderly musicians who would soon have a dignified home, about the legacy I was creating in memory of Charles. "All right," I said finally, "but it will be on my terms, on my territory." "Where?" "At the Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home. If Javier wants to talk to me, let him come see what his selfishness helped create." The meeting was set for Wednesday afternoon. It would be the first time I would see my son since the public humiliation at the auditorium, and this time he would come as the supplicant. On Wednesday, I arrived at the mansion an hour before the agreed-upon meeting with Javier. I wanted to walk through the gardens, breathe the fresh country air, and mentally prepare myself for what would probably be the most important conversation of our lives. The renovation workers had already begun their work. The main garden was being restored by a team of landscapers who were working for free, excited to be part of the project. Inside the mansion, electricians and plumbers were working to modernize the facilities without losing the building's historic character. Maria Fernandez had arrived that morning to help me plan the layout of the rooms. At 73, she was still a woman of tireless energy. "Emily, this is going to be wonderful," she told me as we toured what would be the private rooms. "Imagine waking up every morning in a place like this, surrounded by other musicians who understand your passion. That is exactly the dream. And your son? Do you think he's going to try to stop the project? He can't anymore. The papers are signed, the money transferred. This is going to happen with or without his approval." At 4 o'clock, I saw Beatrice's car coming up the driveway. Javier got out of the passenger seat, moving like a man much older than 42. He had visibly lost weight. His clothes were too big for him, and he had deep, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Beatrice stayed in the car. It was clear that this conversation had to be just between mother and son. Javier approached slowly up the main path. When he saw me waiting for him at the entrance of the mansion, he stopped completely, as if he hadn't expected the place to be so impressive. "Hi, Mom," he said in a barely audible voice. "Javier." We stared at each other for several seconds. The man in front of me was not the arrogant engineer who had humiliated his mother 3 weeks ago. He was someone broken, defeated, who seemed to have aged years in days. "Can we talk inside?" he asked. "Of course, follow me." I took him directly to the music room. I wanted him to see the Steinway piano, to understand the kind of beauty his stolen money had helped create. When we entered, Javier froze. The room was spectacular. High ceilings with original moldings, large windows overlooking the gardens, and the shiny black piano placed in the center like a jewel. "Mom, this island," he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Beautiful?" "Yes, it island. This is where the residents will give concerts for themselves, where they can remember why they fell in love with music in the first place." Javier sat down heavily in one of the chairs surrounding the piano. "How much did this cost you?" $140,000. The rest of the money from the sale of your apartment is being used for the renovations and to establish an operating fund. The apartment that was mine. "The apartment that I bought with my money and never legally transferred to your name?" I corrected him firmly. Javier looked defeated. "You're right, as with everything else. What did you come here for, Javier?" My son looked up, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real tears in his eyes. "I came to ask for your forgiveness." Not the fake forgiveness I asked for in the auditorium in front of all those people, but a real, honest forgiveness. "I'm listening." "Mom, I've realized that for years I've been a horrible person to you. Not just because of the violin, but for everything. For treating you like you were a burden, for acting as if your sacrifices for me meant nothing, for using my financial success as a way to control you." I remained silent, allowing him to continue. "When I was a kid, you were my hero. I remember the nights when you taught me to play. Your patience when I got frustrated. How you worked 3 jobs to pay for my music lessons." The tears were flowing freely down his face now. "At some point, I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as a charity project. When did that change?" "I think when I started making more money than you, when I could buy you things you couldn't buy for yourself. My ego got so inflated that I forgot that everything I am, I owe to you." It was the first time in years that Javier had spoken with complete honesty, without defenses, without justifications. "And what do you expect from me now?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied immediately. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to reverse the sale of the apartment. I don't expect you to reinstate the financial help. I don't expect anything because I know I don't deserve anything." This answer surprised me. I had expected pleas, promises, attempts at negotiation. "Then why did you come?" "Because I needed you to know that I finally understand. I needed you to know that I realize what I lost. I didn't lose an apartment or money. I lost my mother because of my own arrogance and selfishness." Javier stood up and walked to one of the windows overlooking the garden. "This place is going to help a lot of people, isn't it? That's the intention." "Good. I'm glad to know my stupidity at least served some positive purpose." He turned to me. "Mom, there's something else I need to tell you. I lost the big contract I was bragging about so much. When the videos from the auditorium went viral, the company decided they didn't want to be associated with someone who treats their own mother badly." "Viral videos? You didn't know? There are at least 5 different videos of that night on YouTube. One has over 200,000 views. The idea that my confrontation with Javier had been seen by so many people was surreal to me. And how are you handling that professionally?" "Badly." I've lost 3 clients in the last 2 weeks. Apparently, no one wants to hire an engineer who steals violins from his elderly mother. There was a poetic justice in that which I couldn't ignore. And Beatrice? Abby? Beatrice is trying to keep the family together, but it's hard. We had to move in with her parents temporarily. Abby is disappointed in me, and she has every right to be. Javier returned to his chair. Mom, I just want you to know one more thing. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be half the person you are. Not to win back your forgiveness, but because I finally understand what kind of person I want to be. I stood up and walked to the piano. I lifted the lid and played a few soft notes. The sound filled the room with a perfect resonance. Javier, I'm going to tell you something you might not want to hear. Tell me. I forgive you. My son looked at me in total shock. What? I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because holding a grudge is preventing me from fully enjoying this new chapter of my life. Mom, I don't. But, I continued before he could interrupt, forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to how they were. Forgiveness doesn't mean you get your apartment or your allowance back. Forgiveness means I have decided not to carry your betrayal as a burden in my heart. Javier nodded slowly. I understand. Really? Yes, and that's okay. You've built something beautiful here, Mom. Something that will last long after we're both gone. I went to him, and for the first time in months, I hugged my son. I could feel him trembling in my arms. I love you, son. I have always loved you. But love doesn't mean allowing you to disrespect me. I know, Mom. I know. When he pulled away, he looked at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes for years. Genuine respect. Can I visit you here sometimes, when it's finished? Of course. And bring Abby. She's going to love meeting the musicians who will live here. As Javier walked back to the car, I stood at the entrance of my new creation, feeling for the first time in weeks that I had recovered not only my violin and my dignity, but something much more valuable: inner peace. The Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home would be more than a refuge for elderly musicians. It would be my legacy, my proof that even the most painful betrayals can be transformed into something beautiful. 3 months after my confrontation with Javier, the Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home officially opened its doors. The opening ceremony was an emotional event that exceeded all my expectations. The mayor of Evanston was present, along with representatives from the state and several music critics from major newspapers. But what filled me with the most pride was seeing the first 12 residents, all retired musicians between 65 and 80 years old, playing together for the first time in the main music room. Maria Fernandez conducted a small ensemble consisting of Fernando Ruiz on piano, Amparo Delgado on second violin, and myself as first violin. We played Pachelbel's Canon in D major, the same piece I had taught Javier when he was 8. In the audience, in the 5th row, were Abby, Beatrice, and surprisingly, Javier. He hadn't told me he was coming, but his presence didn't bother me. In fact, I was glad to see he had made the effort to be there. After the musical performance, I was asked to say a few words. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. 4 months ago, I was a retired woman living alone in an apartment, playing my violin only for the walls. Today, I wake up every morning in a house full of music, surrounded by people who have shared my passion for this art for decades. I paused, looking at the attentive faces of the audience. This house would not exist without a personal betrayal that forced me to re-examine my life. Sometimes the worst experiences lead us to the best discoveries. Charles Carter, my late husband, used to say that music never dies. It just finds new voices to express itself. Today, his memory lives on in every note that will resonate in these halls. The applause was long and warm. Several journalists asked me for interviews after the ceremony, but what marked me the most was the conversation I had with one of the new residents. Esperanza Vega, a 78-year-old pianist who had played with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for 40 years, approached me with tears in her eyes. Emily, I've been living alone for 5 years since my husband died. My children live abroad and hardly ever call me. I thought my days of making music were over. She pointed towards the mansion. This has given me a reason to live again. Conversations like that constantly reminded me why I had made the decisions I had made. That night, after all the guests had left, I sat in my private room on the 2nd floor of the mansion. I had a perfect view of the gardens, now fully restored, with illuminated paths and strategically placed benches to enjoy the scenery. Someone knocked softly on my door. It was Abby. "Grandma, Can I come in?" "Of course, honey." Abby entered and sat in the chair next to my window. At 15, she had matured considerably in these months. The family experience had been difficult for her, but it had also made her more reflective. "I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you," she told me directly. "Why?" "For not giving up, for turning something bad into something good, for showing that it's never too late to start over. And how is your dad?" "Better. He's been going to therapy. He got a new job, not as well paying as the last one, but he's trying to rebuild his reputation." Abby paused. "He's also been practicing the violin again." That surprised me. "Really?" "Yes. He bought a used violin and practices for an hour every night after work. He says he wants to remember why he loved music when he was a child. The idea of Javier returning to his musical roots moved me more than I expected. And you? How are you with all this?" "Good. At first, I was angry with you for what you did to Dad, but then I understood that Dad did it to himself." Abby looked at me with those wise eyes that reminded me so much of Charles. "Besides, look at what you've created. This house is going to help so many people. Do you like coming here? I love it. The residents have been teaching me about different instruments. Mr. Fernando is teaching me piano, and Mrs. Amparo is giving me basic violin lessons. Do you like the violin?" "Yes, but I don't want to take up your time with your instrument." I got up and went to the closet where I kept my student violin, the one I had used before recovering my Stradivarius. "Abby, I want to give you something." I took out the case and showed it to her. "This violin was with me for many years. It's not a Stradivarius, but it's a good instrument. I would like it to be yours." Abby's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, I can't accept it. It's too valuable. It's valuable to me because it will continue to make music in the hands of someone who appreciates it. That's what musical instruments need, to be played, to be loved, to be a part of someone's life." Abby hugged the case against her chest. "Will you teach me to play it properly? It will be an honor." The following week we established a routine. Abby would come to the retirement home every Saturday morning, and we would spend 2 hours practicing together. But it wasn't just musical instruction, it was moments of connection between a grandmother and granddaughter that had been impossible when Javier controlled our interactions. The other residents adored Abby. Esperanza taught her music theory on the piano, Fernando explained composition, and Amparo gave her tips on bow technique. The house had become a small intergenerational music academy. One Saturday, while Abby and I were practicing a simple duet, I received an unexpected visit. Javier appeared at the entrance of the music room with his own violin case in hand. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Abby." "Dad?" Abby stopped playing, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming today. I was hoping maybe you could teach me that piece you're playing. It sounds beautiful from the garden." I looked at my son, this 42-year-old man who had had to lose everything to remember who he really had been. "Have you been practicing?" I asked. "Every day. My fingers are sore and my technique is horrible, but..." He smiled shyly. "It makes me feel connected to you again, connected to the good memories of my childhood." "All right," I said finally, "but you'll have to follow my tempo." Javier smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. As it should be. The three of us began to play together, me leading the melody, Abby following the harmony, and Javier struggling to keep the rhythm in the simpler parts. It wasn't perfect music, but it was real music. It was a family rediscovering what they had lost. When we finished the piece, several residents had appeared in the doorways and windows of the room, applauding softly. "That," said Esperanza from the entrance, "is the most beautiful music I have heard in this house." And she was right. Not because of the technique or the perfection, but because it was music born from forgiveness, from growth, and from a family's second chance to remember why love had always been stronger than pride. 1 year after that fateful night at the Street Lawrence Auditorium, I wake up every morning in my room at the Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home, feeling a deep satisfaction I hadn't experienced in decades. Today is a special day. It's the first anniversary of the home's inauguration, and we have organized a special concert where each resident will perform a piece that represents their personal story. But the most significant thing about this day is that Javier has been officially invited as a guest musician. During this year, my son has completely transformed his life. After losing his job at the engineering firm, he decided to start his own business. His new venture, acoustic design for musical spaces, was born directly from his experience helping with the renovations of our retirement home. "Mom," he had told me 6 months ago, "I finally found a way to combine my technical training with the love for music you taught me." His first big contract was precisely the acoustic design for a new conservatory in Valencia. Now he has a 3-month waiting list for his services. But the most important change has not been professional, but personal. Javier has gone back to being the sensitive young man he used to be before success clouded his judgment. His therapy sessions helped him understand that his arrogant behavior had been a compensation for deep feelings of inadequacy. "For years I felt like I could never live up to you musically," he confessed to me during one of our walks in the gardens. "So I decided to surpass you financially. When I achieved that, I thought it gave me the right to judge your value as a musician." Abby, now 16, has become the most promising violinist in her high school. She has won 2 regional competitions and is being considered for a full scholarship to the Juilliard School. Every Saturday she still comes to the house for her lessons with me, but now our sessions are more conversations between musicians than traditional classes. "Grandma," she told me last week, "when I'm older I want to open my own musical retirement home, but for young composers who don't have resources." Her vision for the future fills me with pride and hope. This morning, while I'm having breakfast in the main dining room with the other residents, I receive an unexpected call. It's from Anthony Miller. "Emily, I know you may not want to talk to me, but I had to call you." "I'm listening, Anthony." "I wanted to invite you to a special concert I'm organizing. It's a charity recital to raise funds for your retirement home." The irony is beautiful to me. The same man who had been part of my humiliation now wants to help with my redemption project. "Why do you want to do this, Anthony?" "Because over this past year I've reflected a lot on what happened. I realized that although I was a victim of Javier's lies, I was also complicit in your humiliation. I want to do something to make up for that." "You don't need to make up for anything, Anthony. You were deceived too. Maybe, but my conscience needs this. Besides, I've been following the work you're doing at the retirement home. It's inspiring. I accept his invitation. The concert will be in 2 weeks, again at the Street Lawrence Auditorium. This time, I will be the guest of honor." That afternoon, Javier arrives early for the anniversary concert rehearsal. He has brought something special: sheet music for an original composition he wrote over the last 6 months. "It's a sonata for 2 violins, he explains, as he arranges the scores on the music stand. "I wrote it thinking about us, about what we lost and what we recovered." We begin to play together. The music Javier has created is surprisingly mature and emotional. The first part represents the conflict, melodies opposing each other, rhythms clashing, discordant harmonies. But gradually the voices begin to meet, to complement each other, to create something beautiful together. "It's autobiographical," he tells me while we rest between movements. "It's perfect." During the concert that night, we perform Javier's sonata as the closing piece. The audience, composed of residents' families, local authorities, and people who have followed our story through the media, stands for an ovation that lasts several minutes. But the moment that moves me the most comes later, during the reception. An elderly woman approaches me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Carter, my name is Linda Sandoval. I'm a widow, I live alone, and I've been an amateur violinist my whole life. Would there be a possibility for me to apply to live here?" "Of course. What motivated you to consider moving here?" "Seeing how you transformed a personal betrayal into something so beautiful. If someone who is 70 can start a new life, then I can too." That conversation makes me reflect on the true impact of what we have created. The Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home is not just a home for elderly musicians. It has become a symbol that it is never too late for personal reinvention. At the end of the night, after all the guests have left, I sit in my favorite armchair in the house library. I have my Stradivarius in my lap, not to practice, but simply to feel its familiar weight. Javier appears at the library door. "Can I sit with you for a moment, Mom?" "Always." He sits in the chair next to mine, the same position we used to have when he was a child, and came to listen to stories before bed. "Do you know what's the most ironic thing about all this?" he asks me. "What?" "That by trying to take your violin because I thought you didn't deserve it, I gave you the opportunity to prove that you are a much greater musician than I ever imagined." "What do you mean?" "Mom, you don't just make music with instruments. You make music with human lives. This house, the residents you've inspired, the families you've brought together, that is composition in its purest form." His words fill me with a deep emotion. For 70 years, I had considered myself a frustrated musician, someone who had never reached their true potential. But Javier was right. I had found a different way to make music. And you, son? Are you happy now? Happier than I've been in years. I lost money, status, property, but I got back something much more valuable. I got my mother back. I got my love for music back. I got my daughter's respect back. We sit in silence for several minutes, enjoying the tranquility of the library and the soft sound of the other residents preparing for bed. "Mom," Javier says finally, "thank you for not giving up on me." "I never gave up on you, son. I gave up on who I thought you were. But the real Javier, the boy who cried with emotion the first time he played a complete sonata, he never left. He was just hidden under years of misguided pride." That night, after Javier leaves, I play my violin one last time for the day. Not a classical piece, but a simple melody I improvised. A song of gratitude for second chances, for rediscovered family, and for the understanding that sometimes the most painful betrayals are exactly what we need to find our true purpose. The Charles Carter Musical Retirement Home will continue to grow. It will continue to house elderly musicians. It will continue to be a refuge where art never grows old. But more than that, it will always be a reminder that the most beautiful music is not played with instruments, but with the human heart, and that it is never too late to compose a new symphony with the broken fragments of our lives. My violin has come home, my son has come home, and I have finally found the perfect score for the rest of my life. If you liked this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thanks for watching.